And it is my pleasure in this session to introduce an incredible speaker and a very dear friend who is going to lead us in a conversation on leading with love and going much deeper into what that can look like and what that can mean. And I think that we will all make connections with how that is so consonant with the cares with the Sisters of St. Joseph. So let me start by introducing our speaker. Dr. Mary Dana Hinton is the 13th president of Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, and president emerita of the College of St. Benedict in St. Joseph, Minnesota. She comes out of Catholic higher ed, and we keep bringing her back into it. An active and respected proponent of the liberal arts, her leadership reflects a deep and abiding commitment to educational equity and the education of women. Dr. Hinton earned a Ph.D. in religion and religious education with high honors from Fordham University, a Master of Arts degree in clinical child psychology from the University of Kansas, Lawrence, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Williams College. She is the recipient of the Bicentennial Medal from Williams College and Honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from Misericordia University, the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, and Mount St. Mary's University. In 2021, Hinton was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, an organization established more than 240 years ago by the nation's founders to honor exceptionally accomplished individuals and engage them in advancing the public good. Dr. Hinton's scholarship focuses on higher education leadership, strategic planning, and inclusion in higher ed. Her most recent book, Leading from the Margins, College Leadership from Unexpected Places, was published by Johns Hopkins University Press in February 2024. Her next book, Where Love Leads, is forthcoming. She is also the author of The Commercial Church, Black Churches and the New Religious Marketplace in America, and a frequent op-ed contributor across higher education publications. You have probably seen her work. Dr. Hinton is a member of the board of directors from the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, NICU, as we familiarly call it, where she serves as chair. She's also an Interfaith America, American Association of Colleges and Universities, the Teagle Foundation, and I am proud to say the board of trustees at Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles. It is my pleasure to welcome Mary Hinton. And before I pass this to her, I do want to say we'll follow the same format that we had in the first session. Mary will present her work, and then we'll have time for about 15 minutes for questions, and I'll moderate those in the chat. So please do put questions in the chat, and I'll make sure we get to all of them so that Mary can provide greater wisdom on the things that you're most interested in pursuing and exploring in greater depth. So with that, let me pass this to our good colleague, our good friend, and one of the wisest women I know, Dr. Mary Dana Hinton. Mary?
Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're located. And I cannot thank you enough for that very kind and generous introduction. It is so good to be with so many friends in Catholic higher education, and particularly those affiliated with the Sisters of St. Joseph. I saw a few names in the participants list. So hello to Heather and Lorraine and Sister Sharon and so many others. Joy, I know you're there, and Lucille. I just want to say hello to so many of you. You know, before I get into my prepared remarks, I just want to say that this notion of love as leadership was born at Misericordia University, which is founded by the Sisters of Mercy. And Sister Jean Massaros had a rocking chair in her office. And I would sit there and just listen to her wisdom of what it means to have a charism and how that informs everything, including mission. And most importantly, how charism has to inform how you approach and engage your colleagues, your students, and every person you encounter on our campuses. So I want to honor Sister Jean for all that she taught me and say that this notion truly does come out of what I learned in Catholic higher education. And I'm just so grateful to be with so many of my sisters and brothers today to offer these sort of ideas for your thought and feedback. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't begin by saying that perhaps there's never been a more difficult moment in which to be a leader in higher education. As political rhetoric becomes more and more divided and partisan, individuals have come to expect their institutional leaders to pick sides for the institution. At the same time, as trust in higher education and all institutions wanes, leaders are less likely to be given the benefit of the doubt. Amid these realities, campuses are looking to their leaders to reaffirm their values, beliefs, and moral certainty. We are all expected to make choices and decisions instantly and flawlessly in any number of arenas. From my perch over the past year, I have watched women presidents who comprise about 30% of college presidents be 100% of those called to account in Congress for over 6 months. And just last week, the lone female president who testified before Congress about higher education was held to a vastly different level of interrogation than her male colleagues. In this semester alone, 4 presidents of color with whom I am familiar have announced that they are stepping down due to the outsized stress of the job, stressors often coming from within their own institutions. And I will confess that I recently gave a speech about how I feel as if the moral injury attached to this work and in the world today could very slowly erode my soul. The list goes on. Without a doubt, leadership in higher education is the most challenging, volatile, and disorienting it has ever been. In my 10 years of being a college president, I have never experienced the multitude of competing, often incompatible demands that higher education faces today. If we lean in the direction of one group, it's viewed as an abject dismissal of another. And to suggest that we are all together in the enterprise is often viewed as naive. And the issues that we face are themselves more challenging. On many campuses, we are facing an existential crisis. If we don't rectify our business model, grow enrollment, retain highly qualified faculty and staff, and better serve our students, we will not survive. And while I can wholly accept and understand the argument that if you aren't able to do those things, you aren't competitive, very few people recognize that for many of us, we are attempting to rapidly undo years of status quo in an industry that was created to conserve knowledge and often resist change. The need to develop and maintain sustainable business models demands relevant and resonant curricula, the provision of an unparalleled student experience, and an economic model that is attainable for all families. The campus must be, on the one hand, actively engaged with the concerns of the real world, while at the same time providing a bubble of safety that protects all of its occupants from any harm. This is enough on its own, but these leadership demands themselves don't exist in a bubble. We lead in a moment in our world, at least in the United States, where leadership is often compromised by fear. Fear that if a difficult decision is made and implemented, perhaps a life-saving decision for the institution, then the leader will be publicly drawn and quartered and face an equally public loss of employment. Our role as educators is compromised by fear as well. We live in fear of alienating our market, our students, by educating them about harsh realities and allowing them to experience life outside the bubble. To be educated is to have experience and engagement with other ideas and people, no matter what our legislative leaders may say. To educate is to create the cognitive dissonance that is necessary to allow learning to take place. We cannot truly educate students and simultaneously protect them from the fact that they will encounter ideologies and people and perspectives different from their own. The missions of our institutions, in fact, demand that we expose our students to multiple diverse viewpoints. Right now, however, everyone from parents to governmental leaders, people with no experience or research to support their suggestions, want to weigh in on curricular content and pedagogical practice. Unfortunately, in this moment, to educate and make uncomfortable runs the very real risk of being labeled as something negative, of having our humanity questioned and challenged because we disagree with an idea or we privilege our justice-oriented missions. Now, I want to be clear, I share all of these examples not as an excuse. Leaders and educators should be held to the highest standards. But in today's society, the lack of forgiveness, the lack of belief in redemption, the lack of belief in one's ability to evolve and change has forced leaders to choose transactional leadership, being operational and tactical, over what I argue are the more important skills of leadership: being human, humane, and authentic. In fact, the difficult demands of contemporary leadership and the lack of forgiveness, redemption, and care are now limiting the humanity of the leader. I have said often that redemption and forgiveness are among the rarest of jewels today, though every human being can be assured of needing both at some point in their lives. Those skills are as constant as taxes and death. Yet our society seems to pride itself on deriding one another at our weakest moment, at choosing to further deflate rather than support a troubled spirit. Where, I wonder, is the care and humanity? And while this phenomenon seems to have accelerated and been amplified in recent years, I'll be the first to say it's not entirely new. In fact, this talk was in some ways born almost 2 decades ago in response to a deeply personal experience. At the time, I was serving a president who did magnificent things for the institution, and without their leadership, it is entirely possible that the institution would not be around today. At the time, I had major responsibility for retention, and as you do, provided frequent updates to the cabinet and occasionally the board. On one such occasion, I had to report less than good news as we had not met our retention target, which is a very difficult thing to report. But I felt I needed to be forthright about where we landed, and I offered the news without excuses. To this day, I can recall the president looking and pointing at me as they eviscerated me in front of the cabinet. And while I cannot deny that I had not met the target, I can assure you that I didn't deserve to be spoken to in that way. So at that moment, I wrote down on a notepad, "You can be a successful leader without compromising the humanity of others." I have carried that ripped off sheet of notepaper with me now for nearly 2 decades. It has served as a powerful reminder of many things, but most of all, that the people who work with and for me are human beings. That institutional success at the expense of their humanity is not desirable, nor, I would argue, possible. To believe otherwise as a leader or an educator is a perilous state at which to arrive. So what I learned in that memorable moment and what has shaped my own leadership, perhaps more than anything else, but especially in these difficult times, is that in order to lead, one must begin with a heart for the mission, a heart for the institution, and a heart for people. To lead, then, demands that a leader share their deep humanity with those around them. And this, I believe, is where love enters the equation. Now, I want to begin by just briefly explaining the type of love I'm talking about. Of course, this is not eros or romantic love. That is out of bounds. Rather, I'm talking about agape. Fry wrote, "Agape relates closely with spiritual leadership based on values like forgiveness, kindness, integrity, compassion, honesty, patience, trust, and humility. Agape like spiritual leadership, involves treating followers as complete persons with physical, mental, and spiritual needs. Carvalho and Mulla suggest that agape love is not only how you view the other, but how you actively engage with those around them. They write, agape is a form of love that involves intentionally promoting well-being in response to acts, persons, or structures that promote ill-being through humility, self-sacrifice, forgiveness, empathy, emotional control, and impartiality, end quote. Agape, I suggest, demands that you are attentive to and intentional about how you engage with each person around you. Now, I know for some, agape's deep religious and spiritual connotations can feel like a barrier on our campuses. So for those you encounter who may not resonate with that perspective, I want to offer an alternative, but I believe equally value option. Van Dierendak and Patterson suggest that, quote, this love, a love they call compassionate love, is shown by leaders who consider each person as a total person, one with needs, wants, and desires. The leader that leads with compassionate love has a focus on the employee first, then on the talents of the employee, and lastly, on how this benefits the organization. Compassionate love is others-centered love and includes attitudes, actions, and expressions. So here's an example that I can offer that brings these pieces together. At the start of each year in my presidency at the College of St. Benedict, we would have a new faculty family picnic. And faculty would bring their children, most of whom were toddlers. Now, they're new faculty, so I didn't know the faculty and their children, but I remember feeling this crushing pressure to be a better leader. I would stare into little toddler eyes, and I would realize those eyes were expecting me to lead in such a way that their parents came home whole, spiritually intact. Those eyes needed me to build a sustainable organization so that their childhoods would not be disrupted. Those sweet stares made me realize that I had to create an environment of care because they would be indirectly subject to the environment I created and nurtured. It was then that I began to ponder the connection between love and the liberal arts. Now, I would argue that a liberal arts environment which nurtures freedom and belonging compels a need for love. Education at its core is about freeing minds to ensure the freedom of a people, freedom to act as a citizen, freedom to live a life of consequence, freedom to determine one's own future. That, I will argue, is the very purpose of education. Therefore, to lead within or adjacent to the liberal arts sparks a compelling need for love as an institutional value. Not only must we reflect love, but we must also teach it. Our institutions have a curriculum that demands love. And here, I'm not talking about gen ed or a major. I'm talking about the very soul of who we are in higher education. I believe that this sense of care and nurture in the service of human freedom as a product of education matters more now than ever before. And I believe it's mandatory for those of us who proclaim the value of the liberal arts or who describe a liberal arts foundation. So I want to go to Paulo Freire, who wrote, "Because love is an act of courage, not of fear. Love is a commitment to others. No matter where the oppressed are found, the act of love is commitment to their cause, the cause of liberation." And here we see the connection between love and liberation. If the liberal arts, if education is about liberation, then it's easy to see why philosophy of love is essential for education. And I will just add that in this age of technology, social media, and AI, humanity and love are even more critical. I mean, let's be honest. Students don't need us to simply gather sheer information. They can find all the facts and falsehoods they want on their phone. But while they don't need us to generate information any longer, they desperately need us, perhaps more than ever, for knowledge and for wisdom. They need us to use a loving context, to be willing to convert volumes of information into an education that frees. For learning to happen and to excel in the tradition of the liberal arts, students, faculty, and staff all need to be able to open their minds and their hearts to one another. We have to trust one another enough to listen, to take in, and to engage. To convert knowledge to wisdom, we need to be vulnerable to our humanity, to that of one another, and to love. And this is the kind of thinking that technology cannot, and I will argue will never be able to master in the ways humans can. And that I believe those of us who are in Catholic higher education or in institutions with a strong mission call have to dwell within. So as I consider this, a model for learning and leadership begins to emerge. A model that calls us beyond our hermeneutics of suspicion, beyond academic dog whistle politics, beyond legislative intervention and curriculum. If what we want is a society that lives up to its grandest aspirations, we must invest our hearts in education. We know that education frees the mind. That is its core tenet. But we know that being truly free exacts a cost. It requires that a human being seen honored, valued, and cherished as they are. It demands that curricula and spaces are created wherein that human is willing to open not only their mind, but their hearts. I believe truly that this vulnerability compels us to act in ways that are compassionate, expansive, and inviting. I believe that with everything in me. When our students feel that, when we are compassionate, expansive, and inviting to them, they then are open to love and to learning. Now, those of us educated in the liberal arts tradition reflect qualities achieved only through connection and love. And here I'm going to turn to William Cronin. He provides a list of characteristics for those who are educated in the liberal arts. He says, they listen and they hear. They read and they understand. They can talk with anyone. They can write clearly and persuasively and movingly. They can solve a wide variety of puzzles and problems. They respect rigor not so much for its own sake, but as a way of seeking truth. They practice humility, tolerance, and self-criticism. They understand how to get things done in the world, and they nurture and empower the people around them. Most of all, when we choose to connect with one another, recognizing that the purpose of the freedom we achieve through education is not merely to meet our own ends and needs, but to facilitate a common good that can only be found through connection, a common good built on love. So again, I say to you that I believe love is the imperative of our mission, our success, and the hope of our soul, of the curriculum and our culture. Now, whether you choose to frame love as agape or compassionate leadership or even servant leadership, love is truly a compelling and demanding leadership choice. And I can certainly understand that many people think if you were the leader, you need not concern yourself with love. That, in fact, you have the unique opportunity to not have to worry about love. You have the power to do what you want. But I believe this bifurcation of love and power is both artificial and harmful. And I think it's important to understand the power of leading from and with love. The power is both positive in how one leads, but it also demands that difficult ideas, topics, people, and situations be approached with love. Long ago, Martin Luther King wrote, quote, "And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites, so that love is identified with a resignation of power and power with a denial of love. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." Let me say that last one more time. Love implementing the demands of justice. Power correcting everything that stands against love. If I go back to Van Dierendak and Patterson, I find that they talk about love and fear as leadership strategies. They say love and fear have been placed as opposite ends of a continuum. And within this continuum, fear will produce organizational cultures where followers will feel powerless. The opposite side of the continuum offers leading with love. This is where followers feel alive, connected, and energized. Love encourages acts of helping, cooperation, sharing, and understanding. For leaders, fear is manifested as the arrogance, selfishness, deception, unfairness, and disrespect, while love is manifested as the generation of dignity, respect, and honor, end quote. So in these challenging times, I feel like we must, especially for those of us who live in a charism of unifying love, we must elevate love, forgiveness, integrity, and trust for ourselves and for others. And we must live these practices not merely in words, but in the environments we create and in our posture in the world. So for these reasons, it is because, not despite, all of the many problems we face in higher education that I am encouraging you to choose love. King referred to love as the moral cosmos, the highest good. I simply believe it is what will save our collective spirits and our institutions in this moment. If we are called to change our institutions to make them sustainable, then we need to think carefully about what that change should look like. Srinivas Koka wrote, quote, "Change is created by effective leadership and is about all the things that are hard to measure." Because effective leadership is about feelings, because feelings drive culture. The elephant in the room, however, is the feeling that no one wants to talk about at work, but which is the final arbiter of whether an environment is the absolute best it can be. And that feeling is love. Goes on to write, so the first transformative step, and it requires courage that a leader must take, is to step outside traditional lines and use words like love, community, belonging as part of everyday conversation. Only by discussing these feelings will a leader establish the authenticity needed to convince the team members that she is committed. That feeling is love. Now, if our work as leaders, and everyone on this call is a leader, if our work is to make a place better, to be faithful to the time and place in which we are serving, we must reflect love. Now, allow me to be clear. I do not naturally love each person I encounter all the time because I am a human who fails. However, as the president, as the leader, I must choose to engage and lead with love for and with every person I have the privilege of leading. I have to center them and their needs in order to move my institution forward. Carvalho and Muller wrote, quote, leaders who demonstrate agape must at all times demonstrate moral behavior by promoting the other's well-being, even if it does not match the authenticity of his or her feelings towards the other person or his or her perceived notion of morality, end quote. Translated, love is hard. You know, I have long said that being a good leader is not about being the smartest, loudest, or even most powerful person in the room. It's about a willingness to be in deep relationship with all those you serve, even and perhaps especially when you don't want to be. And to that true, albeit optimistic view, I feel I need to add that it is hard to love sometimes. When you see people actively and without repercussions erasing your history, it's hard to love. When I see my sister presidents getting worn down, it is hard to love. When you face your own professional challenges and people actively work against your vision while offering no vision of their own, it is hard to love. When you're doing all of the work and getting none of the credit, it is hard to love. When you can see success and yet each time you are near it, it is taken away because of lack of resources or worse, lack of will. It is hard to love. But love we must. So I believe that what we are called to today and forevermore is to love one another. When we face the negativity of the world today, as hard as it is, we must turn to love. When we feel trounced upon, we must turn to love. When we not only feel downtrodden, but are downtrodden, we have to, with intention and good conscience, turn to love, as challenging as that may be. So how do we apply this in our daily lives? Well, first, remember the characteristics I shared earlier about what the liberal arts teach and what liberal arts graduates are expected to do. So in our curriculum, classes, and programs, let us teach and learn these things explicitly. Let us reward and incentivize these classic liberal arts outcomes in our institutional structures and priorities. Next, proclaim that for which you stand. These days, it is so much easier to shout out what you are against, to rail against systems, to declare the faults of the world, to decry the status quo. What I find to be rare and precious in the world today is a statement about what one stands for. What is the platform from which you will make decisions? What are those things that are your permanent North Star, regardless of the happenings in the world around you? What must be defended always? What guides you? when so little around you makes sense? Responding to these questions internally and publicly is, I would argue, the agape work of leaders today. Start by sharing what you are for and who you are for. If you are for love, tell everyone. If you are for hope, spread the word. Have that inform how you start or end a class or a meeting, whether or not you send an email, how you reach out to a colleague. Share your vocational aspirations and your heart of leadership with others, and invite them to do the same with you. Next, let's decide to have the courage to open our hearts and to ponder agape. How will you learn more about agape as a leadership theory, and can you make a commitment to doing so? Can you commit to doing just one thing differently based on what you learn? Let's decide to be appropriately vulnerable in our professional relationships and in our spaces with students. And our daily task, let's choose to seek and share hearts in our biggest and smallest moments. Can we agree to be in deep relationship with those around us, recognizing that this is emotional labor, but that the payoff will benefit us personally and professionally? I encourage us to invoke David Scobie's notion of relentless welcome. Let's not limit our welcome to our newest community members. A first day is not the only moment to extend welcome, care, support, compassion, and curiosity. Let's ask how we can make our longest serving employee or our most senior students feel newly welcome today. And I will add that you should also try to find a way to relentlessly welcome yourself. Find the joy that once brought you into this work, even if you have one foot out the door. Remember that joy, because that joy was less about the place and more about your heart. When your heart felt worthy, when your work felt sacred, when your community and your humanity felt honored, when you felt bright, new agape love. Find that welcome and know that that is who you are and what you deserve. So I will say that love as leadership is complicated. However, my work for and my commitment to love is not hampered by the difficult nature of leadership today. If anything, I find the need to center love even more critical in these most difficult moments to inform the most difficult decisions, and quite frankly, when I engage with the most difficult people. It is in those moments that I need to take a step back and intentionally choose love. Intentionally choose to see someone's full humanity in all its complexity. Intentionally choose to allow myself to be seen as fully human. To recognize that my institution's well-being is intimately tied to the well-being of all the people who comprise the institution. To intentionally choose to be loving, especially when it's hard. So I will conclude this talk with a quote from Bell Hooks, who wrote, "Taught to believe that the mind, not the heart, is the seat of learning, many of us believe that to speak of love with any emotional intensity means we will be perceived as weak and irrational. And it is especially hard to speak of love when what we have to say calls attention to the fact that lovelessness is more common than love. That many of us are not sure what we mean when we talk of love or how to express love. And it is especially hard, let me repeat myself. that it is especially hard to speak of love when what we have to say calls attention to the fact that lovelessness is more common than love, and that many of us are not sure what we mean when we talk of love or how to express love, end quote. I believe this quote to be especially emblematic of how we work and live and lead in higher education. We deal with matters of the mind, not the heart. But the act of learning, which leads to an education, which leads to freedom, and it's most powerful, is best when it permeates not just our brain matter, but the matters of our heart, our humanity, and our individual sacredness in the world. And to all of you who work alongside the Sisters of St. Joseph, you know what it means to love, to talk of love, to express love. You have a unifying charism of love. You just simply need to take that in its boldest expression and share it with those around you. May your work be motivated by care. May your days be dedicated to the common good. And may your leadership be animated by love. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for that incredibly moving and also challenging set of remarks to really help us in our thinking about the not just the lessons of love, but the call of love. And so thank you for that. It was magnificent.
Thank you.
We have a few questions in the chat, and others may come. So let me bring those to your attention. And please, if others people have some, let us know. First question someone asked is, do you have any suggestion on how we can keep love at the forefront with busy and demanding jobs that seem to take us further away from each other?
Yeah, that is a great question. You do have to spend your time thinking about and talking about love. And it does take time. You're essentially trying to do a culture shift when you are talking about love. But it works. I am here to tell you it works. And here's my evidence of that. I left the College of St. Benedict in 2020 and started at Hollins in the summer of 2020 and we were very locked down. And I spent the first 15 months easily engaging over Zoom and really personally working out this love as leadership theory and wondering how could I begin to talk about this with people that I'd only either seen on Zoom or had seen masked. And finally, one day I just said, I'm just going to start talking about love in every conversation. And without doubt, that's what I started to do. It doesn't take any more time for me to mention something loving and to use the word love in remarks than it does to use any other words. And so that's what I started doing. And I did it at faculty meetings, at State of the University addresses, at trustee meetings. And of course, every time I would see a student, I would tell them how much I love them. And it makes people uncomfortable at first. I mean, if it's not how you feel, don't do it. Like if this isn't bubbling up in your heart, if you're not really all in on the charism, be very careful. But if you are, and if you open yourself up to that, people will respond. And so now when I see a student, or I just got a note from a faculty member, today, a thank you note talking about the way love animates this campus now. I'm looking down because I keep very special notes under the glass on my desk. I get notes from students and board members and faculty members and my colleagues that use love language in them. You just have to keep at it. If it comes from a genuine place and you keep it at the forefront, and you just keep at it each day. And you do have to do it each day because it has to become a habit. And because, at least if you're me, some days you're going to fail at it and you have to try even harder. But I would just say start by talking about it. That's what I mean when I say, what's a way you can incorporate agape into your into your leadership or your classroom or however you engage with your community.
Great. Another question I think actually follows that, and perhaps just takes it a little in a more specific direction. Um, how can university cultures heal the divides that often emerge between faculty, staff, and administrators?
Yeah, boy, have said, I say it in some form or another at every faculty meeting, and every state of the university meeting. That trope that says it's faculty versus administrators or faculty versus staff, I believe is what will ultimately be the undoing of many of our institutions. We simply cannot exist without each other. And that notion that has been so unquestionably received in higher education that one group is all good and another group is all bad, or one group is fanciful and another group is logical and really gets what's happening, that is a devastating trope. And it is a harmful trope. What other words could we use on a campus where we would so unquestioningly accept, well, the faculty do this and the staff do this? We wouldn't put in any other demographic markers and get away with it on our campuses. So why do we allow that? And that's a real hot button issue for me. So I find that when you want to address something like that, you have to name it. And so I name it. Does everyone agree with me? Nope. Is everyone never going to agree with me? No. But I feel my responsibility as the president is to name that. And I'm beginning to see more and more people, I can't say explicitly push back on the notion, but through their actions, I'm seeing more and more people say, we are so much stronger together than we are if we're just fighting up against one another. I don't know about the institutions on this call, but my institution doesn't have the luxury of having these fights between groups. Because if the faculty aren't successful, the administrators can't be successful. And if the administrators aren't successful, the faculty can't be successful. And if both of those groups aren't successful, our students aren't successful. So I try to call that out when I hear it. And I can fall into the trap sometimes too. And I have to call myself out when it happens because it's not good, right, or just to talk about a group that way. I do think just one other quick thing. I think that many of us are in a higher education environment that we did not sign up for. And I think for those of us who have been in this environment for a long time, so long serving staff, long serving faculty, we're looking at a higher education environment that was not what we stepped into. And I do think it's important that we all allow space for people to feel a sense of loss or even a sense of grief that this industry has changed under our feet. And I'm going to misquote Augustine of Hippo, but there's a quote that I do frequently share with my faculty at the university writ large, and that is hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and the courage to make things better. Now that's a misquote, but it's generally the idea. And I share that because I think sometimes that divide is a manifestation of anger at the way things are. And what I want to do is invite us all into courage so that we can manifest hope.
Thank you for that. Another question is, this is a good one. How can folks help guide their leaders toward leading with love or support them in this? Is that possible? I think people are looking at you, Mary, and thinking, that's a really good way to lead. How do we help leaders do this?
I will say that I hope that people on my campus would say I lead in this way. I hope. But two people, one of whom is on the screen today, and one of whom who can hear me through my office door, would say that it's a harder way to lead. I do want to say that. So if a leader is not choosing that, it might be because it requires a great degree of vulnerability. And I want to acknowledge that. It opens you up to the risk of being hurt. It makes you, in some people's eyes, I think, appear less powerful. But I also think it makes you appear more human, which to me is how I hope my legacy will be judged, on the depth of its humanity as opposed to the power piece. Um, I think you can go to a leader, particularly at an institution with the sisters, and ask, have they thought about this? What encourages them about it? What challenges them with it? What can you do? If your leader wanted to take this on, what could you do to help support them in that? And then I think you just have to hold space, that some people will say, they could say a couple of things. Yes, I want to take the risk, but I'm afraid, and you're going to have to be there to help them. They could say, you know what, that's just not me. And we were on a panel together, and one of our fellow panelists was like, I can't do that. Right. And she's a loving, wonderful person, but she was like, I can't do that. And that's real. And you shouldn't try to do it if you know you can't. And some people will say, they don't believe it, that it's not what they want to do. And it's helpful to know that. And it looked like you were going to add something. I spoke over you.
No,
I
I
apologize.
remember that panel, and I remember so clearly we were laughing because this colleague of ours said, I tried to do that, and I tried to sound like Mary, and it just didn't work. I can't do that. And we were laughing and thinking how important it is you be authentically who you are as a leader.
Yeah.
You can't, if I start speaking Mary's language as Mary speaks it, will not be authentic sounding because it comes from her heart. And I think all of us have to figure out what that looks like within our own
Within our own
personalities and
heart.
our own styles. Yeah, our own
That's
heart.
exactly right.
Mary,
Exactly.
there's another question for you, and there are lots of comments expressing gratitude
Thank
and
you.
the inspiration people have felt. There's a question: what keeps you awake at night, and how do you keep love guarded in your heart and the institution while there is so much uncertainty?
Yeah. Everything keeps me awake at night these days, my friend. I mean, I just look at me. This is why I look this way, because I've been up for a semester. Um, what keeps me up at night in my heart about leading with love is really questioning, am I moving the institution as deliberately as I could? Because sometimes I go slower because of the love element. Am I doing what I need to do as quickly as some might want it done? Because I try to privilege love, which means sometimes you go a little bit slower. I think the other thing that keeps me up at night is when you have to make really difficult decisions. And, personnel decisions are the worst. And so I try to stay mindful of how do you make those decisions with love centered. So it takes a little while to do that. So that keeps me up at night. But to the second part of your question, if I weren't focused on love, I don't know that I would have made it through this semester. In the book, so Where Love Leads, will be coming out sometime in the next 12 months, I think. And I open and close it with the same thing that I had to write for myself. And it essentially boils down to, I chose love because I had nothing left. There's so much outside of my control right now, outside of our collective control in higher education. And I feel like what gets me up is that I'm choosing love. And if I didn't have love to choose, I don't know that I would be able to stay in the work right now. But being willing to see people in their full humanity and to see our work as an act of love is what gets me up in the morning.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you for gracing us today with your presence, your wisdom, and your absolute beautiful message that I think inspires us all and challenges us. I
Thank
can't
you.
imagine a better session that moves us into difficult conversations.
Mm.
And we have about 15, I guess 19 minutes, I think, until we gather again. So everybody can have a quick break. And please help me again express our gratitude to Dr. Mary Hinton. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.